Well, I think about someone like someone joining a meeting with you and me in the meeting. They
Yeah.
should know ahead of time that literally the way that we wrestle through ideas is by debating and fighting it out. And
Yes.
so if you didn't know that about us, you would walk into a meeting and be like, oh man, Holly, hate each other. Like
Right?
they're at each other's throats all the time. It's like, no, this is like our love language. Like this is, we pull up the thread and we debate and we're fiery, but that's what you should know about working with us. If you don't provide that context, people might create really unhealthy expectations.
Welcome to the LeadrPulse Podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. I'm Holly Tate, Chief Marketing Officer here at Leadr, and on today's episode, I am so excited for you to hear from Randy Wootton, the CEO of Maxio. He has built and scaled many fintech companies, and so he and Matt on today's podcast unpack the spicy take of how he hires people that have strong opinions. And then Matt and I get to debrief if we agree, disagree. It's definitely full of lots of hot takes. So enjoy this conversation with Matt and Randy.
Randy, good to see you.
Great to see you again, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had the opportunity to be on your podcast. I think it was about a month ago, and we had a ton of fun. And right at the conversation, I thought to myself, we've got to get Randy on LeadrPulse. So here we are. So we're just going to dive in. Let's talk about something a little hairy called disagree and commit. And you have this line, which I love. You said, alignment does not mean agreement initially. And then this is it. Listen to this, everybody. If you never disagree with me, you're not adding value. If you never disagree with me, you're not adding value. So Randy, talk to us about this. This is awesome.
Well, Matt, this comes from a document that I was advised, I don't remember when, in my first CEO gig, called Working with Randy. And every CEO, I think, can do something similar, which is like your operating system. And it outlines how you perceive the world, how you like to interact, and what are your peccadillos and hot buttons. And so one of the things I try to do in this is just give guidelines around like how I show up and how to interpret things. And people will get to know it over a period of time, but it helps new executives ramp. And so the thing that became clear to me as I ramped into the leadership roles was, look, it'd be a lot easier if I could just hire a bunch of people that were like me, thought like me, acted like me, responded the way I did, but I was never going to get the best idea. And so the opportunity to increase the overall effectiveness of your first team, of your executive team, comes down to hiring smart people who have strong opinions, loosely held, but who come to the table with an opinion. And so this idea of, if we show up and I have an idea, my best idea is never my first idea. It's always going to be my third or fourth idea after I've heard other people contribute. So if you're part of the executive team, my expectation is you're going to be there and participate. I call it constructive tension. You're going to come in with ideas. You're going to come in with data. You're going to articulate what your assumptions are. And then we're going to work through problems, challenges together. And there's never one right idea. There's an idea that you probably think is the best given all the information you have. And then you got to disagree and commit. You got to disagree. If you disagree that that's the right path forward, but it's not in your specific area or function, you make your vote known. And then as we walk out of the room, you have to be able to commit to be able to support the decision we made. What I hated when I was at large companies was they would talk about the meeting outside of the meeting. That you'd be in the meeting and everybody would be talking and they would all agree. And then you come out of the meetings, happen primarily at Microsoft, and they'd say, no, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to do this. And you're like, wait a second. We just
what was the purpose of the meeting?
Right. And we spent so much money in that meeting to get aligned. And now you're going to go out and subvert it. Or so that's the broad idea, is that you want to create a safe place where people can engage in ideas. They don't feel attacked, but they're going to be engaged in ideas.
I love that. Okay, let's go back to, there's so much we can unpack here. Let's go back to something you said earlier, which I just want to double click on. You said strong opinions loosely held.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Oh, well, it just means that, by the time you come to be an executive at a startup, you have functional expertise and you have a point of view about how to do things. Like I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to know, should we move to microservices and which services should we go first, and how much do we want to allocate to reducing tech debt versus investing in customer escalations? Like, I have an opinion around that, but I want the other executives to come in with strong opinions. And loosely held means like they're not going to get into a death match over it, that they're going to articulate what the assumptions are. They're going to share their data. And if it seems like there's a reasonable alternative, they can let it go. And so for
Right.
me as a CEO, especially going to that point of like, I may have an opinion around our tech debt allocation of engineering capacity should be 15%. And that's based on, I've talked to 30 other CEOs and they all think that's the right number. My head of engineering could come in and say, Randy, based on where we currently are and what we need to overcome, I need to do 20 or 25%. So I have a strong opinion, but loosely held to say, okay, well, let's do that for some period of time, fiscal year 24. And then we need to come back at fiscal year 25 and test the assumptions again.
Yes.
And if it's still true that we haven't gotten over the hump, well, then we need to do something else different because we can't spend 25% of our engineering capacity just reducing tech debt.
For sure. Okay, I love that. All right, so talk to me about how you've created a culture where people feel comfortable disagreeing with you then. And maybe the answer is because you shared that doc with them ahead of time. So they knew there was expectations set, but surely there were other things that you did, because I've heard it said that people laugh at all the CEO's jokes, that overnight the CEO becomes funny all of a sudden. So what is it about Maxio's culture? What is it about the culture you've created where people actually feel comfortable not laughing at your jokes and disagreeing with you?
Yeah, I always joke that no one ever tells me the truth. Right? Because always shades. I don't know, Matt, you've been in this business as long as I have. I think a bit of this is I always start with, I am in relationship with another person. And so I am very explicit about how I am trying and relationships are rooted in trust, how I am trying to build trust with that person. We use things like insights profiles to get a better sense of who we are as people and how we show up. We spend time talking about it and how we can work better together. In my reviews that I do with people, I do them twice a year. I break it out into the what and the how. So what are they doing in terms of the objectives they're achieving and how they're showing up? We have a great leadership framework in terms of the expectations for how you should show up as a leader. I give them feedback, and then I ask for them to give me feedback, and I write it all down. And every 6 months, we check in on it. Are you doing what you said you were going to do? Am I doing what I said I was going to do? Can we tweak that? And so I think if you're being deliberate about the relationship and you operate from a place of trust, which is transparent when you can be, because you're not going to share all decisions and all information with everybody, but if you operate from a place of integrity, you admit when you haven't done something or you made a mistake. I think that's one of the other big things as a CEO. You can really demonstrate humility and vulnerability by admitting mistakes. You start to build this trust and relationship. And one other thing I would say is I think it also depends on how you show up in the meetings. So when I'm at my best, when someone's presenting and maybe it's not the executive, but it's someone on their team, I have this technique where I'll write down on a piece of paper. I'll say, I'll give them the full time. I'll say, hey, we got an hour. I'd like you to present for 45 minutes and then save the last 15 minutes for us to have a conversation. During that time while they're presenting, I'll try to find 2 things that they did really well in the presentation. I will write down the questions that I'm having, and mostly I'll find that the questions are being answered throughout the presentation. And then I have this little thing, a check mark. And the check mark is the things that I want to give them guidance on, like to go do this. Find is, Matt, people they do a lot of work to come to front of the CEO. They just want to give a chance to give their story, their spiel. And so you letting them talk and starting off with, hey, here's the 2 things I really liked. It may be you like the color of the slides. Right. But you come out with show them a little love. And then you ask questions at the end so that they have a chance to tell their story. Because I know when I've been presenting to people, sometimes I don't even get out of the gate and already the CEO is crushing me with questions. Like, well, I'm going to answer that on slide 10. Just let me get there. And then I get all frazzled. So I think if you set up this context where you allow people to share their point of view in a thoughtful way, and you are thoughtful in your response, that promotes a good exchange of ideas. And so to your point, that helps create a culture where people feel like they get a chance to be thoughtful.
He is such a good leader.
I literally was thinking as you were sharing that, I want to go and work for Randy, which is crazy because I'm not quitting Leadr. But seriously, did you not think the same thing?
Yeah. Well, and we met Randy when you were actually on his podcast first.
Yes.
And I remember we had like a pre-meeting with him, and I felt like he belonged with our team. Like and he didn't even know about Leadr.
Yeah.
But the way that he operates as a leader and his values are so aligned with us and our mission. And so I just love this episode that you did with him because it's so chocked full of tidbit. I mean, even in this clip that we just listened to, I feel like we could do 5 episodes on that.
I literally had to say, okay, stop. There's so much we can unpack. Let's go back to, like, I think the second thing you shared. I'm like, let's just pause and spend time on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I probably wrote down like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 takeaway. I don't think we'll get through all of them, but let's start with the work with Randy Doc, because I know this was after you first learned about this from him and the podcast that you were on with him, you brought this to our executive team and showed it to us. So what stuck out to you about the work with Randy Doc that you thought was so effective?
I think especially if you're a team that's newly formed or someone else is joining your team, it's like you're not starting at square one. You're giving them a leg up. You're creating an opportunity to get to know each other a little faster, and it lowers the temperature in the room a little bit because you understand people's idiosyncrasies. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also think the reason why it resonated with me was, and not, I mean, this is going to sound like a sales pitch, but I just love it so much. Our profile inside of our own platform is kind of meant to do that. And he's doing it using a Google Doc. But the point is, like, before you even meet someone or when you're just beginning a relationship, to have all of that information front-footed so that, like, for example, I can be direct, and I've learned over the years that my written communication comes across very different from my verbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I can put that in a doc or like in our Leadr profile that says, like, I might come across as short on Slack, it doesn't mean I'm mad at you. It just means I'm probably in a meeting trying to multitask and responding to you. So yeah, I think it just kind of how he ended that clip, which is like, when you lead with trust and integrity, and a way to do that is by front footing and telling a person, like, hey, here's how I'm wired. Here, assume the best about me.
Yeah.
Because here's a little bit about me and how I operate. It just helps us trust each other.
Especially for people that maybe have a misconception and they don't know what it's like to work directly with you. So I've got a funny story. Well, not funny for the person that was involved, but funny for me looking at them. So it was one of my friends years and years ago who got promoted. He'd worked with the executive for about probably 10 years, but there was a middle manager between them. And then that person moved on. And so my buddy got promoted and worked directly for this executive who he'd known forever and they were on great terms with. The following week, after the promotion was official, he got a calendar invite from the executive's assistant, and it just said, catch up for an hour. And there was no context. There was no heads up. There was no nothing. He called me the day before, and he's like, I'm getting fired tomorrow. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I got this calendar invite. It's for an hour. I don't know what it's about. I'm meeting in their office. I'm like, what are you talking about? You've known them for 10 years. He's like, yeah, but I've never met directly with them. Anyway, I called him the day afterwards, and I'm like, hey, what happened? He goes, oh, we just were catching up. I was like, wait, so you didn't get fired? He goes, no, I didn't get fired. Turns out whenever this person gets a new direct report, part of the way that they like to work is they like to just get to know someone first. And so we spent literally an hour talking about life. And I said, how powerful would it have been if you had known ahead of time that one of their idiosyncrasies, if you will, was like relational deposits before making withdrawals or before having big conversations. But he didn't know that about him. So what an easy thing to do, to just give people a leg up and not make them so anxious.
Well, and I learned this from you. You say where clarity lacks, negativity fills the void. Yeah. And so, I think when we don't know someone, especially when it can be a scary thing to be talking with the CEO or the primary leader. So just be like, hey, here's a doc, or here's my Leadr profile before we meet, check it out, a little bit about who I am. Would love to hear this from you. Can't wait to get to know you better. Like, lowers the anxiety and tells us what we're actually meeting about.
Well, I think about someone like someone joining a meeting with you and me in the meeting. They should know ahead of time that literally the way that we wrestle through ideas is by debating and fighting it out. Yes. And so if you didn't know that about us, you would walk into a meeting and be like, oh man, Holly, hate each other.
Right?
Like, they're at each other's throats all the time. It's like, no, this is like our love language. Like this is, we pull up the thread and we debate and we're fiery, but that's what you should know about working with us. If you don't provide that context, people might create really unhealthy expectations.
It's so true. It was so good. So work with Randy Doc, or work with Holly.
Do it. Create your own doc.
Yeah, that's a really good actionable insight. I mean, I feel like that right there could just be like shortest, most helpful little podcast is.
Yes. What motivates you? What demotivates you? Like when you're at your best, when you're at your worst, just some of the basics. Just give people a heads up.
So true. Okay. The second thing, I'm curious to hear what you think about this. He said his job as the CEO is to hire smart people that come to the table with opinions. I love hearing him say this because I recently hired somebody for our team and I told her in the interview process, like, I want you to come in opinionated. And I think the problem is that a lot of people, if they've had a negative relationship with a boss previously, where maybe their hand has gotten slapped or they've overstepped, I've found that people can come in more timid. And so with this person, I really wanted to front foot that and just say, like, I am hiring you because I do not want to think about this. And I want your strong opinions to help drive this business forward. But I'm not a CEO. I'm a CMO. You're a CEO. What did you think about that, of like the having people come with smart opinions?
I like the way you frame like ideas meritocracy sort of idea. Is it's like the best ideas need to win, not the person with the fanciest title. But it's such a tension because you're right, Holly. This idea sounds really great in theory, but if you've ever worked in a place where you kind of peeked above the parapet and shared your ideas and you just get slapped down, you easily feel like, well, I don't want to get my hand slapped again. I'm not going to speak up next time. So I think it's on us as leaders to create an environment where it doesn't matter titles in the room. It doesn't matter tenure. It doesn't matter degrees or the experience that you have on your wall. It doesn't matter your LinkedIn resume. It matters who's got the best idea. And so drawing to pull people out of the title and the world that they live in to share their thoughts. What a powerful thing to do as a leader. I've heard it said, as the leader, you should be the last to express opinions. Because if you express your opinion first, everyone's going to fall in line and use your bias will kind of inform their opinion. And so first to listen, last to speak. It's such a hard thing to do, especially someone wired like myself, where it's like, I've got the answer, I'm going to jump in. But no, first to listen, last to speak. Otherwise, you're actually submerging your ideas in their opinion before they even share it.
Yeah, I know you've been practicing that lately. You've been actively trying to, and you'll say that in a meeting, like, okay, I'm going to be the last to share. I want to hear y'all's thoughts. Yeah.
I literally sit on my hands. If you're just listening to us and not watching, I literally put my hands on my butt and I sit on them and I'm like, okay, shut up. Don't say anything. Speak last.
Yeah. The amount of energy that takes for you I know is quite a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot.
Okay. But I'm going to call this a hot take. It's not that I disagree, but on this topic, and this is something that Garrett and I, our COO, and I have talked about before. Like, he and I are both very opinionated, which is hilarious because we are very different personalities. Like, I think I might have shared this on a former episode, but like, y'all know me, you listen to me on here, like, I'm vivacious and loud and, very like up and down, even with my voice. And Garrett is like steady Eddie. He is consistent. He literally, I don't think, can ever raise his voice. Like, I just don't think he's able to. I mean, yeah, and he is logical and analytical, and I am more of a creative thinker and like have lots of ideas swirling around all the time and usually terrible at articulating them in a concise way. So what's interesting on our executive team, though, is he and I often disagree because also with the working genius, we're both discerner. We have the discernment genius. So one of the tensions that I know he and I have both felt recently is what happens when you have two strong or multiple strong personalities who have strong opinions. How do you decide on a team? Like, because it's different because like Garrett and I are peers. We don't report to each other.
Right.
And so that has something that I've been wrestling with. It's like, what do you do when you have two really smart people who view the world very differently, but have very different strong opinions? So I'd love to hear from you on that, like, as the CEO who is both of our bosses, like, how do you navigate that?
Well, I'll say a few things. One, I love it. And a lot of the reason I love it is because if everyone in your executive team thinks the same way, or even on any team, if they all think the same way, you're not going to make challenging, maybe contentious decisions because you're just going to do what's easy and what's comfortable. It makes for really fun meetings. I'll say that. Like, I do not get bored because Garrett and Holly are always disagreeing with each other and sharing their opinions. And usually what happens is it's not about meeting in the middle. There's just this like tug of war that happens. It's like we pull at this idea thread, and somewhere within that pulling and that tension, the truth comes out. And Holly, maybe you've noticed this, maybe you haven't, but at some point along the way, I've realized, okay, now it's time for me to step in and make a decision. So I think even you, actually, true story, you or Garrett will actually say, Matt, I actually think it's time for the CEO to make a decision here.
Yes.
And I wish that wasn't always the case. I wish that it would always kind of naturally evolve and produce sort of this like perfect answer that everyone goes, that's it. But actually what ends up happening is we contend through an idea and we argue and we debate it, and there is no clear alignment, and I'm forced to either say there's a third option or quote unquote I pick a side. And that's a tough thing to do, because I don't want the impression to be, well, Matt took Garrett's side or Matt took Holly's side. I want it to be, no, I'm choosing this idea's side. So it's difficult, it's hard, but I think it's better than just being stuck in the loop and going round and round and round and round and round.
It's true. And I think that he and I have definitely gotten better at this, but like when we do align, when we're able to wrestle it out together, and we get to an alignment, then we know it's an awesome idea.
Yes.
Like, because we've figured out, to your point, either like a third option or a compromise that we both feel really excited about, or are able to take from both of our ideas to forge a new idea. And that's where, that's really exciting when we get there.
And I'll say this, I feel like it's my job to pull more of that conflict and mine for more of that conflict out of both of you. Because when I see someone extremely animated and opinionated about something, it's easy for the other person to either become defensive and fight or flight. And when I see the flight complex happening and they run away, it's like, no, I'm going to run into hibernation and not fight. I'm like, no. Come back to the table, because somewhere in the middle, there's an answer. And the more that you two kind of get after it, the more it informs my opinion and decision too. So I think it's extremely healthy. And I think what that does is do what Randy said is the worst thing to do, which is the meetings after the meetings. Meetings after the meetings create politics. Meetings after the meetings create factions. Meetings after the meetings erode trust. And you want to inform as much of that conflict, healthy conflict, but as much of that conflict within the meeting, within the conversation.
Yeah, which you haven't always done that as a leader. That has been kind of a newer thing for you, which we talked about a little bit in season 1, but I would love for you to share your kind of realization of what it looked like to engage in healthy conflict inside of our executive team meetings versus saving it for a meeting after the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick recap. The idea is the old idiom of praise in public, correct in private has some really dangerous consequences, because if you're only correcting in private, or if you're only having conflict in private, or if you're only giving feedback in private, nobody knows what actually happened. So, for example, if we're debating out an idea and everyone else in the room doesn't really seem to matter, but Holly and I are really going after it, and I say, Holly, let's take this offline, it does a few things. Garrett and Brett, who's our CFO, they don't know what resolution we came to. They don't know if it was contentious. They don't know if we got heated. They don't know if we got our feelings hurt. They don't know what decision we landed on. And we don't know if either of us were on board or if it was just rammed through. And so the next meeting we come to, there's kind of this elephant in the room. It's like, ooh, I wonder if they talked about it. I wonder how that went. I wonder what they decided. I wonder how, I wonder if they, all the things. And if you don't come back and close the loop, you've just created another faction. So now it's like, no, we're not going to take it offline. We're going to bring it online, and we're going to bring it into the room, and it's uncomfortable and it's awkward, but it builds so much trust.
Well, and that reminds me of another thing that Randy said was, let's see, I wrote down, his job is to create a safe place where people can engage in ideas. And so what you, especially as the CEO, if you were to say, Holly, we're going to take this offline, then that tells Garrett and Brett, ooh, it might not be safe for me to disagree, or because again, like maybe that meeting after the meeting was very cordial, and maybe it was just 5 minutes, and maybe it was lovely, but they don't know that. And so they might think, oh, they battled it out. And then I'm going to be, if I'm Garrett or Matt, Brett, I might be scared to speak up next time I disagree with Matt, because I don't want to have the meeting after the meeting. Yeah. So that has been, I feel like before, when we used to do that, there's that conflict continuum that's from Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage, where it's like artificial harmony. And then me on the other end of the spectrum is mean personal attacks. And I feel like we were more on the artificial harmony side. And when that's happening, you're not a team, you're a working group.
That's right.
I feel like we were all aligned with you vertically, but we weren't aligned horizontally. And so we were more of a working group than a true team. And so that was I think it took us a few weeks to kind of get comfortable with it, but it's been a game changer.
I agree.
To engage in healthy conflict inside of the meeting rather than having meetings after the meetings. Not to mention, it's just more efficient.
Less sideways energy, less drama. And you can tell that's the culture Randy's building. Starts with vulnerability with the leader, starts with showing that the ideas come first, and starts with having productive, engaging healthy conflict-filled meetings.
Yeah, it's so good. Okay, well, we talked about a lot today. So the first actionable insight was the work with Randy doc. So what does it look like for you to put together a work with you document so that you can share that with your team and really help front foot some of the nuances that you have as a leader. The second thing we talked about was that your job as a leader is to hire smart people that come to the table with strong opinions. And then we talked about how that's a great idea in theory, but what does it actually look like when it's played out? And what if you have people with very strong opinions that disagree? How do you lead through that as a leader? We didn't really talk a ton about this, but the idea is that I think the sentiment that we were talking about was disagree and commit. So get the best idea rising to the top. And then if people still don't agree, ultimately, a lot of times it's up to the CEO to figure out what is the path forward. And then it's up to all of us to disagree and commit so you can cut down on those meetings after the meetings. So
and just to double click, Holly, if you're the executive leader in the room, it's not your job to just swing the hammer and make the decision prematurely. Your job is to pull at the thread, mine for a conflict, and let the best idea rise to the surface. And then if it doesn't, then it's time to step in and make the call, but don't do it prematurely.
Yeah. Sit on your hands, right?
Sit on your hands. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Matt. And we'll catch everybody next time. Thanks for listening to the LeadrPulse Podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. We hope you enjoyed this episode with Randy Wootton. Be sure to follow him on LinkedIn, where he posts all of his hot takes. And if you're looking for more from Leadr, we encourage you to go to our website, leadr.com, Leadr.com, where you can sign up for the LeadrPulse newsletter that we send out every single week and stay updated here on the LeadrPulse Podcast.